Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Citizen Bear. Once again, this is a podcast that covers many of the topics and issues in my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons. I put together this podcast to step aside and say, as much as, it's cool to buy the book and read the story, it's a great yarn. I highly recommend it. But a little dystopian, if that's your thing. And, if you're just looking for a good yarn, it's a good one. But I would say to you that this is not about buying the book. This is about talking about those things. I think there's so much contained in the book and a lot of those things I'm beginning to see in our world coming true. And I'm a little taken back. And I think it's important to sit down and maybe put some real view on that and some food for thought out there. You don't have to take it as gospel, but you certainly should sit back and think about it. I think those things are important and cool discussion. And I think also at this point, I would say that we're also looking to evolve this podcast a little bit. I've loved doing it. It's a great program. And it's a great opportunity. And I'd like to take it a little further. We're going to get some other people in. I've already started talking to some people. And, we're going to talk about how we're going to brainstorm on how we can do a little better and what we can do next and marketing it and so forth and so on topics. So we'll see where we want to go with this. So look forward to some things down the road that might be a little different and be a little more dynamic maybe. This episode, I call this episode A Very Human View, and we want to pick up on where we left off a little bit last time on seeing things clearly and stuff and talking about some of that. And I want to say there was some things in that episode, the last episode, that I kind of came out of me that ad-libbed a little bit, and that inspired me for this topic. And I wanted to, I don't know if they're going to make it off the cutting room floor. Sometimes these things get, nixed or stuff like that. So if I'm referring to things where you don't understand why I said that, well, it probably got edited or something because I ad-libbed it, but a little too far. But I want you to be able to say, I wanted to be able to say that we're picking up on some of that. And I was inspired to say, I didn't do a good job with all of that. And some of that came out of me, and I realized, wow, that's something that I'm really feeling here. And I think, is very important to the book. And I think we should talk about this in a little more depth. So with no further, pause, I think we can start to say, address the topic. I think that one of the things we want to talk about is, and we're going to talk about a couple of different things today, but really the overtone is how we see each other and the power of empathy in our lives. And also, the realities of our lives. And in that, I want to pick up on the theme that we used last time from Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season and a time to every matter under heaven. And I think that's a really important concept for where we are in the world right now, and we can apply it to a lot of what's happening out there. But I think this is a particular time, and we must rise to that challenge. In the book, my friend Bear is faced head-on with the fallout of the socioeconomic degradation of our society. He also faces the failing of the church at a moment when he looks to his faith in a way it never has before. Bear is faced with the reality that the timing of the war and the attack on his country has been highly calculated. It's not by coincidence. Many aspects of society and government are broken, or at least very deeply impaired by this moment in time. This affects virtually every aspect of their lives and their ability to formulate a response. The attack on their lives, while substantial, was simply designed to push their world over the edge and keep that world in despair until everything that has been represented, was swept away from the face of the world. Change, a new world order. Yet in the midst of this moment, Bear finds hope in his faith, his relationship with God. Ironically, all that the enemy has swept away unburdens him and his fellow patriots and allows them to walk in the footsteps of their founders. And this is a really important concept in the book, and it's an important concept to this topic on a broader sense, that a lot of the time we are burdened with the things of life and the things that society tells us are important. And we have to learn to rise above that. We have to learn to sweep those things away, because when we have a purpose or we go about something or we have to rise to a challenge, often we have to cast them off to be the person that we need to be, to make the choices, to act on our choices. in a difficult time, when there is a difficult season in our lives, these things come along and they change us and they grow us. And this is an important part of what I want to talk about today. I have heard it said that the story, your hardship in your life, the difficult moments, will become your testimony in faith and the basis of a ministry. My intention in this episode is not to ignore any person or group's unique circumstance or pain, but rather to open everyone's hearts and minds to a new perspective. And I think this is really, really important because we get our blinders on in life. And I think it's important to do that. And I don't want to, this is a huge topic, so I don't want to ignore any person or group's particular frustration or pain. I just want to give some food for thought, maybe get those blinders opened a little wider, maybe open that heart just a little bit as we start to work through this, and also strengthen your back a little bit in the process, in the right kind of way. Let me also emphasize to you that the linchpin between falls and recovery, pain and healing, love and hate, endings and new beginnings is faith. By this I mean a personal relationship, turning your life over to Jesus Christ. Before moving ahead with my discussion, I want to set the foundation of this discussion by telling you a portion of my story and the stories of many other unnamed people. By most standards, I was born into a reasonably privileged life. Despite this, like many people, I had my share of growing pains, often self-inflicted, I might add. And in what is without a doubt my greatest blessing, let me to step back. I have to say, one of the greatest blessings in my life, despite my growing pains, is my wife, Donna. And she is just an amazing lady, and I love her dearly. And that's germane to the rest of this topic. But I have to say, when we receive these blessings, we should always remember them and emphasize them, make sure that we don't lose them or poo-poo them to smaller matters. And, when we got married with my wife and I, we started a life together, and we set out a plan. And we worked hard towards it. And, early on, we faced a lot of headwinds. My wife was getting a lot of educations. I worked, and I still try, She, and she's done brilliantly over the years, and I'm so very proud of her for that. And but there was a lot of challenges. We had a child, and, we burned the candle at both ends, long and hard. But we got through it all, and the economy was often very difficult. There were ups and downs, and the area we lived in at the time was, I think the rest of the country was in recession. I think that area was pretty close to outright depression. And it was very, very hard. A lot of industry was leaving and so forth and so on. It was hard to find work, but I hustled and I managed to do it. Then, as we began to settle into our lives and my wife settled in with her career and I was working on mine and building things, the 2008 market collapse occurred. And at that time, I was the guy, my wife and I were people well on our way. We had accomplished a lot, done the things you're supposed to do. Our son was growing up, and we were reaching our goals. And we had socked away a fair amount of money and, had a beautiful home, and we're doing a lot of nice things in our life, and really, really starting to feel the benefit of our, starting to feel the reward of all of our efforts and from the earlier years. And with that market drop there, for those of you who don't remember, and for those of us who do, a reminder, so many people got laid off. And that started the banking crisis and foreclosures and all kinds of things that happened. And it took a couple of years, but both my wife and I were out of work at the time. Then it kind of came in succession, and we tried, we hustled, and without going into a huge amount of detail here, and a sad story, we worked very hard on finding new things, and opportunities collapsed out from underneath us, and It was very hard, and it was very hard to get a job. There's a lot of people looking, and a lot of people relocating, and it was a very, very difficult time. And sometimes you couldn't even get people to talk to you. There were just so many resumes out there. And my wife and I, without going into a lot of detail, we just sat down and took it for a long period of time. Did our best, took jobs that were well beneath us, what we considered what should be well beneath us, and we hustled, and people got a deal. But we did our best, and my wife, just amazing through it all too. But as a course of that, we got our son through school, through high school, and got him into college, and we kept a roof over his head and our heads, and for a time being, and we lost it all. I mean, hundreds of thousands of dollars gone. We had to pay taxes. We lost it all. I mean, every penny to go into keeping ourselves alive, sustained, out of the street, getting our son where he needed to be. And that was a priority for us. And literally, I mean, almost to the penny, we lost it all. I mean, no question about it. He even gave up the house. And that was a very difficult time for us. And I want to tell you, I tell you the story not because I need to relive it or because I want you to have any empathy for me, because I want to emphasize later on how important this moment was. But I will tell you that I was part of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans who suffered through some form of similar circumstance. And there were people, I know you can look to me right now if you're watching on a view channel like YouTube, and or you're just listening, you can tell, my ethnicity and all that, my age generally. I don't hide those things. But, there are a lot of times, though, if someone told you this story, you would have no idea who I was. And in that time, I remember just heartbreaking scenes of, notes scrawled on garage doors, men and women who had done multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq for this country were just foreclosed on, thrown out of their homes. Many people lost everything. I hope all those people that I saw and suffered like that recovered and managed to get back on track, but I fear many never really totally did. I'm not sure any of us totally did, but we managed to go into a new direction. In some manner of speaking, you recover. And I fear that many did not. And many more were caught up in the aftermath of that, all of that, a changing world, a changing economy. And so many people, we see tent cities and in states, and people living in the streets, and veterans without opportunity. And that's just unacceptable in America, but it's happened. And it is, they're not homeless, they're refugees. Let's be very honest. In most cases, some people are homeless, but most of these people are refugees in a society that failed them. And let us not forget that the CEOs of those banks who were bailed out by our tax dollars, who were foreclosing on these people's homes without mercy, wrote themselves bonus checks, and no one did anything about it. It is one of our darkest times in free society and in the free market. But talking about that, I have to say my wife and I rebuilt and remade our lives, and that's a good thing. And I want to talk about other people because there's a couple of very important concepts here, and I have to say when my wife and I were going through that period, we prayed every night. We stood shoulder to shoulder, and we did what we had to do to make it, and we did rebuild our lives, and we've come back, and we've made back a lot of our wealth. I don't know if you ever totally make it back, right? But from like an accounting standpoint or a finance standpoint, but the truth is at least we got ourselves back up, and we've begun to rebuild wealth. We have a beautiful new home we just built, and we have another house that we took over from her family, and things are moving forward. And I tell you, during those times in my life, and I'm sure that other people felt this too, no one helped me. No one. I stood in there was a time I stood in a marketplace in a grocery store, and I was pulling $20,000, $30,000 out of my investments, out of my retirement, everything. My wife and I, shouldn't just say mine. And we were pulling money for this, and we had to pay extra taxes and penalties if we pulled it out of our retirement. We were finding places, that pockets of money that we had saved. And I remember going to the grocery store one day, and there was a lady, and I don't begrudge her. I'm not saying anything, but, this young Latino lady, and she seemed like a very, very nice young lady. And she had a grocery cart filled with stuff, and I mean good stuff, right? She was clearly buying for more than one for herself, I suspect. And she stood there in line, and she had like 3, 4, 5. She looked like she had a poker hand full of these cards, the government cards. I can't remember what they call them, but she walked up to the thing and swipe, 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 and she paid the whole bill with these cards. It wasn't lost on me that the taxes that I was paying, the penalties that I was paying to stay alive and put a roof over my head, my son's head, and my wife and I's head, was kind of paying for that. And that's a bitter pill sometimes when you're hurting yourself. And I was not eligible. Government agencies had no interest in me. We checked. No, forget it. There was nothing for us. And no one else. Friends, family, you'd be surprised how quickly they dry up. And some of them were a little bitter. People I'd known a long time. People who I cared about, People I'd done things for. They were gone. They didn't have anything to offer. Some of them honestly couldn't. Our families, they were in a position to help. And they didn't. It was more important to them their pride was far more important to them. And that's a terrible statement, but it's the truth. And you get a great insight into people and life when you're in this situation. And I mean, not even an encouraging word. And in some cases, there were even family members who took the opportunity to kick us when we were down. People who had never seen our highs and, frankly, were willing to kick us when we were low. And it's a terrible, terrible statement about our world, but it's also a reality. But I want to make the point, if you're talking about privilege out there, you need to see clearly how the other part of this world is really living. And there are a lot of people out there today in this world, and I will tell you, that are suffering under economic hardships. But I would also make the point to you that many of the people who lost their farms or, lost their homes, and veterans and other people, just good people working, lost their jobs, went through these hard times, lost their families. Their families broke up. It was a strong point for my wife and I to keep our family together. And I'm so proud of her for doing that and helping me with that. But I will tell you, people don't always want to help, or people turn on you. The world can be a very cold place when you're down. But when you're looking at other people and you're looking at other groups, let me tell you something. The people that wrote those messages on their garage doors for having done all the tours for this country and served this country proudly and honorably, and to be knifed like that by the banks and our government, we really don't know what their ethnicity is. I don't know that they're black. I don't know that they're white or Indian or anything else. I have no idea. Asian, I have no idea. Latino, I have no idea what their ethnicity is. All I know is that they were human beings who deserved better. And there was very little empathy in the world for them. There was very little justice in the world for them, for us. And that's just how it was. I think that this is an incredibly powerful point that I want to make, and it's something that even my friend Bear lives with in the book, and it's not just, he deals with a lot of political hot topics at the time. He recruits a young lady to take over the security forces of what once was the militias and has become now civil defense in the country, in the book. And he to fight an external enemy. And this young lady he recruits, and he finds her to be very qualified, both past and present careers. And he finds out that she's gay, and she's very unsure that that Bear's gonna want her. And to go back on some of the topics we've talked about earlier here, Bear takes a very different approach. He's like, you know what? She's unsure because his organization, the militia, is very faith-based. And he's like, if you're founded in love, that's all I really care about. I need people who care for each other, and I need you to be part of this. And, I'll take that any day, any day. And he's, if you're founded in love and you really care, and, I'll take that over just about anything right now. It's amazing how his faith evolved and his perception of people evolved. And it wasn't politics, it was humanity. And he was fighting for something he really believed in, and the people around him were too. And it was amazing how big his tent could suddenly become. And that should be true of all of us in our lives too. There's no reason not to embrace each other. Look, there's a lot of discussions out there, preferences. We all have our own thing, right? But on the other side of the coin, we can talk about sin and we can talk about everything else. But as I said in a prior episode, are we really, I think we have to get down to the basics of, are we talking about people who are founded in love? Or are we talking about people who are founded in hate and evil? And we have to watch that line. It's a very fine line. We have to be careful of it. But we have to get down to those basics. And can we work with that concept of each other and build on that and build from there? And my own experience has taught me a lot about that. I think some of that became relevant for writing the book when I was part of the book. Color. So I want to move on and kind of take into account a little bit, start taking some stock in some of this, having put some of this out here. What does this mean for us? First, I think it's important to understand that most Americans are facing real challenges. Everyone. While there are real issues to be addressed for a lot of different topics in our society, most are not living privileged, charmed lives anymore. Not at all. It only takes a small moment, that quick thing, a change in season, and you can be caught and knocked off your pedestal quite quickly. Once upon a time in our country, if you worked hard and pretty good education, you were pretty well insulated from a lot of this. I mean, whether you like it or not, it's pretty true. And I remember those times, actually. Today, sadly, that's simply not the case. My story is a symbol of that reality, as are the story of many and many others, including doctors, accountants, and so on. More often than not, we have so regulated our society and wrapped it in a socialist blanket, people cannot help but be caught in any given upheaval. There's a hospital chain in the area where I live and bellied up. Believe it or not, I don't know how that could happen, but it did. Several hospitals under its control went under, and they locked the doors. And all of the other hospitals or medical centers or whatever, professional buildings, for the most part, got closed too, that were under the auspices of this. And the doctors who were solely linked to those hospitals, working through them, part of that medical system, and I'm sure there are better words for it, but that little group, their practice is closed. My general physician, my family practitioner, just disappeared. Any scripts I had stopped being renewed. That was it. I know he tried. I'm not picking on him. But, and eventually he found a way forward and he started regrouping. But I'm just telling you, can you imagine the family doctor and others, if you're caught in our world where we have all this regulation and we have all these groups and, socialist programs, you're done. You get caught and yours happens not to make it and they shut you down or they regroup. You got to figure it out for yourself, really. And this concept has permeated more and more aspects of our world. So when a business or market gets sick, everyone in that business sphere or of influence can be affected, and there's no question about it. I mean, catch a cold in one place, and everyone who comes in contact with it gets the flu, and that's not the way a free market should really be working. And it's overregulated, it's overcontrolled, and we need to be careful of this. And it's a symptom of socialism coming to task. So many people out there get really excited about the cure, but it's really the disease, and you need to be careful about that. I hate to harp on that point, but we're in a time where we have to make a choice. When we reach these times in our lives, it's easy when something like this happens. It's easy to blame discrimination or something similar, but it's just simply a lie most of the time, used by those who help to create the problem. In a world where farms are being lost, which are one of the bedrocks of our country, many of those farms will never come back. Their failures are not rooted in ethnicity, but rather the system that made their prosperity virtually impossible. Didn't matter what color, what ethnicity they were. There's no talk of privilege. A great American institution, another great farm, a foundation to who we are, and an ability to feed ourselves and the world vanished. And that's beyond tragic. And we don't look at those things. They see they've just become something that happens. They pass by. They don't even make the evening news anymore. And so it goes across our country and in virtually every demographic and industry. So I would charge you with this. Beware of those who preach such hate and division, for they are the handservants of those who built the obstacles and chains we all suffer under. And I've seen this time and time again, and I've seen it in recent history. I've seen so many really great young men and women who've just been convinced and told about hatred and not to like someone else. And, hate has no empathy. But the truth is those people are suffering too in different ways and in different lives. And just because they're finding ways forward and finding new success, that doesn't make them evil. It means that they're trying. And you should try too. Because I want everyone I don't care about race, color, creed, or anything. I want people to succeed. I want America to be great. I want you to feel the opportunity that I saw in my youth of the free market and a free society. And I think that this is something that I really want to press in the fact that don't go out there and look for, people preaching hate. You want people to preach faith. Faith founded in love. That is how you overcome these things. That is how you get through. And that is how you bring really great people to you when you're struggling. Not through hate. Hate ain't going to do nothing for you. It's going to make it worse. Marxism preaches hate. It is a hateful rhetoric from cover to cover. And it really offers no true solution. It talks about destruction and therefore becomes a segue. Everyone says Marxism leads to communism, and Marx talked about some of the founding principles of the communist society. Great. But what he really is bringing in is authoritarianism. Don't ever let anyone fool you. There's no utopian society. It has always, always, always been authoritarianism. George Orwell talked about the fact that, in keeping with his book of 1984, that what the future held was the idea that the idea of authoritarianism in our world was that of being kicked in the face constantly, forever. I've heard it said of communism, it's an ideology that you can vote your way into, but have to shoot your way out of. We don't need that. Through my life's tribulations, I grew in so many ways and became stronger than I could have imagined. And this is a new topic. I want to change pace off the kind of the, divisions that are brought on that people try to separate us through ethnic values. And I want us to look beyond. I'm not saying there aren't some real concerns, and I'm not saying there aren't some real gripes, but I think there's a need for an empathy within our society and faith-based in love to reach out and understand that we are all trying to do better, and that the circumstances in our country and in our world right now are incredibly challenging for just about everybody. And if they're not challenging, it's always amazing to me that if you look at the people who are preaching the hate, the division, some of this rhetoric that we've seen over the last years, they seem to be pretty privileged themselves, and they're always taking care of themselves. They're not helping you. You're helping them. Don't ever forget that. As a matter of fact, you're hurting yourself, which helps them. Take it from an old man. I've been around. When we get out and we go through these hard times and they were faced with them, we often think we're strong and we're plugged into the world around us. But we really find it's only through these trials by fire that we really build true strength and some understanding. We see things a lot more clearly. Like my friend Bear, and I always do consider him my friend. I like him, and he's a great, even though he's a fictional character, I've taken to him and his comrades, his friends, his partners, his patriots. When stripped of those things that the world enshrines, we become clear about the people and things we have foolishly prioritized and surrounded ourselves with. In these moments, when all that we have built is torn down and laid to waste, we learn to build back stronger and better, a new fortress designed for a new world and a stronger future. Truth. The linchpin that joins life and death, endings and new beginnings, hope and despair, is our faith and our relationship with Jesus Christ. Do not underestimate the power of prayer in these moments. Those who preach hate will tell you to compare yourself to others, but I am telling you to relate yourself to God. And there is a distinction there. Winston Churchill, one of our favorite people, or inspirational people, once famously said something to the effect that if you find yourself going through hell, keep going. And while no one wants to suffer, certainly no one, me being one of them, getting too old for this nonsense, we can lose so much. But I did lose so much, things that were stripped away from me. But who I have become and seen so many others who I've seen grow is absolutely priceless. The change in your perspective, the change in your faith, the change in your personality, how you carry yourself is a very new thing. Your center becomes strong. I've learned to take the best of who I was and combine it with the vision of what God wants me to be. I'm going to say that again. I've learned to take the best of who I was and combine it with the vision of what God wants me to be. And maybe who I'd like to be too. We have to meld that together. In this ideal is the reality or the ideal of two dragons. In the end, we learn that we have to learn, and as Bear learns, and it's an important note to the book, and to us in our lives. True warrior is also the good shepherd, and that is two dragons. I believe that the growth that has come from these times lays the foundation for change. We gain the clarity and strength to rise above the bureaucracy and frame our choices as truly free people. No person can truly ever be free without God's grace. And I think that that's something that we all have to embrace. That big government, authoritarianism, socialism, communism, fascism, whatever you want to call it, they all control. They all repress. They all manipulate. It is in the faith that we bring to free society and faith that we bring to the free market. And that was something that was lost in 2008, I might add. But when we bring this to the free market, into our lives, we rise above big government. We rise above bureaucracy. We rise above it all. And in our lives, when we move into a new season and we leave the hardship behind, we find that we are stronger and with a very fresh perspective. We see things clearly, and we begin to really rise above that and make choices, and are capable of making choices from a position of real strength. We know that we are right, and we know that we are just in our views. And that is what liberty is really about. Make no question, this is the path of our founders. May we in our hardships embrace God's will and fiercely pursue the path that he lays before us, not the path of the bureaucrat or the career politician. In this we are forged, remade to handle the burdens of this world. We become worthy of that which God reinvests us with, which we are once divested of. This is the soul that the Marxist, the authoritarian, and the career politician truly fear. And I want to kind of reemphasize that. The reason they want to control you, the reason they want to take your faith away from you, the reason they want to divide you is because they don't want you to gain that soul. They don't want you to gain that strength. They don't want you to see them for what they really, really are. That truth, that strength is what they fear more than anything in the world. The only thing they fear more than that is having those people heavily armed. Let me tell you, this is what our founding fathers did. They were subjects of the crown. And the greatest empire in the history of the world at the time. The greatest army, without question, the greatest navy. And they said enough. They weren't going to be abused anymore. They rose above the bureaucracy. They rose above the hate. And they went to take it on. And they said no more. And they fought back. With God's providence, they won. And they set a new precedent, a new ideal into the world. And today, we are fighting for that precedent. I pray that we have the strength to make sure that we do not fail all those who came before us. So let me stand a little bit further into the conclusion here and kind of wrap some things up. Recap here a little bit. Do not let those who benefit from hate and division change your heart. I see so many great young people and with so much potential harming themselves, fighting for an ideology that in the end has no place for them, you, or me. Do not fear the temporary loss of material or ideological things and embrace the path, that path. Embrace what God has for you. Embrace the path that lays ahead of you. Don't be afraid to grow and change and cast off some of the things, the people, the places, the things that society has told you are as important. You'll be reinvested with those things, but in a different way and possibly and more than likely in a greater way if you start walking the journey of faith and citizenship that you were meant to walk. And this is exactly what happens to Bear and his patriot friends. Pursue the path with all your heart. And the blessing of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, not to sound like a benediction, but pursue that. Once you find that path, you may not understand it. It may not be clear to you, but you know you're walking it. And the answers will come, and the challenges will come, and you will find ways around them. And you will find others to join you in that journey. Open your heart to empathy, not hate, for this is the foundation of true strength. The kind of strength that evil fears, the kind of strength that will guide your choices. When I talk about love and hate, and I really being founded in either love or hate, the truth of the matter is empathy being an extension of love. You have to have that in you, and it makes you incredibly powerful. If you launch, that doesn't mean that you have to get beaten up. It doesn't mean that you can't defend yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't defend your country or your priorities, your rights, your beliefs. Much to the contrary. It means that you should. I would quote you, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, his only begotten son, that he who should believe in him should not perish but have eternal life. That is what God's empathy is. We're willing to sacrifice for our beliefs, for our love of others, for our love of our country, for the love of our free society, and those who live under it and benefit from it. That is the power of empathy. It makes you stronger. It gives you more if you're willing to use it in the right way and truly found yourself in it. Just quickly, the final note. I'm a big fan of Friedrich Nietzsche, and I wanted to kind of convey a story just quickly about Nietzsche at the end of his life. Now, for those of you who are not really, I'm sure a lot of people don't really follow Nietzsche per se, and I can't say that I'm like, an aficionado, but I have read some of his stuff, and I do appreciate his work. And he's a very profound writer, and he talks about, like Locke, he talks about society. Locke was more of a, society builder and things like that. But, Friedrich Nietzsche really talked about the human condition a lot within society and things, and talking about his Übermensch, a concept that gets misrepresented greatly in the world. But he really, the Übermensch is a very, very complex idea that, not just doesn't boil down to power. But he really wrote very boldly about the human condition, about strength and going out there and standing up, things I've put out here about rising above society and getting above the bureaucracy and the nonsense and taking hold of life. Philosophy, people tend to not bring faith in. They want to talk about strength. They want to talk about society. But the idea of faith in God becomes a little messy for them in how they want to portray it. I think we're getting around that a little bit. And they always kind of dance around it a little bit. They'll come right up to the cusp of believing in God. And they just kind of can't quite get there. And I believe it's really the Achilles heel of a lot of our great philosopher writers. But Nietzsche, at the end of his life, and this is the late 1890s, really, I guess, somewhere's in there, late 1880s, 1890s. He was in Italy, and in a lifetime of such bold writing and powerful thought, complex thought, Nietzsche witnessed something in his old age. He saw a man whipping a horse. Now, remember, horses were the means of transportation back then. There were a lot of horses around. And he saw a man whipping this horse. And he ran to the horse, and he put himself between the man and the horse, and he put his arms around the horse, and he refused to let the man beat the horse, and the man finally backed off. And Nietzsche apparently fell to the ground crying, and he had broken. And he spent the rest of his life in an asylum. He had shattered as a human being in that moment. And many people have said, a lot of, philosophized a lot, maybe, theorized and put a lot out there about Nietzsche. But what happened to him at that moment, or maybe it was just in his makeup, I don't know. But I would say, to me, Friedrich Nietzsche transcended even his own idea of strength and boldness in a world that he had seen so often and analyzed so true, so really, so close to reality, that he, with all of the pain and all of the misconduct and lack of empathy in the world, in a moment of humanity, he saw an act of he had an act of empathy. And I think, in truth, maybe somewheres in it, he realized that he had missed something. That great strength, that great power of empathy was more important than anything. And that's Christ. That great moment of stepping above it all and looking at taking a better way forward is a powerful, powerful thing. And if that is the foundation of your choices, whether they be caring for those or fighting against evil, let me tell you, that is the powerful foundation of moving forward and making a better world. And that empathy is important, and we need to have more of it. And I think Nietzsche found it at that moment in his life where he cracked with all the strength idea, and he realized that there had to be something more, that no one person could have all of that strength. No one has it without something else inside of them. And that is faith. That is your relationship with God, particularly with your relationship with Jesus Christ. As a Christian, I preach that. And I believe it's important, and I believe it's the truth. So I think Nietzsche transcended that, but that's just my personal opinion. But I think it's an interesting note to end on for the power of having not just strength, but finding that strength founded in empathy. May we all be empowered with God's love so that we are ready and prepared to handle the moment that same moment that Friedrich Nietzsche faced, where we see wrong, where we see injustice, where we see real, and we say something, we stand up to it, particularly when it's our government or when it's wrong. That doesn't mean we have to harm people or do the wrong, but we need to honestly look at what's right and what's wrong. And I don't want to get into a lot of the political things, but there are laws for a reason. There are things we do for a reason. And I do believe that there is a Marxist revolution going on in our country, and that there is the foundations of World War III have already been laid and have already been begun. And the fight for free society as opposed to authoritarianism, a new world order founded in authoritarianism, has begun. And we must choose. And that struggle has begun in our country, and it has begun outside our country. And we are quietly pushing back, not so quietly, but we are pushing back in a very tactical and strategic way. And I'm proud of us for that. But let us go forward based on the right ideals. We can be angry. We can fight at the moment. We can even be a certain amount of hate for our enemy at the moment. But what launches us to fight has to be founded in love and has to care for each other. And we must be prepared to do that. And I believe that was the foundation of many of our great people, our forefathers who came before us. They knew why they were fighting, and they knew exactly what they were fighting for. And we must make sure that we clearly see that too. So that ends my speech or my sermon on empathy and faith. And we're going to move on next time and get into a new topic. I have a thought about that. I think I'm looking at emergency preparedness and starting that conversation about emergency preparedness in the modern times we live. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next time.